Chapter 11 of Army Life in a Black Regiment. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by FNH. Army Life in a Black Regiment by Thomas Wentworth Higginson. Chapter 11. Florida again. Let me revert once more to my diary, for a specimen of the sharp changes and sudden disappointments that may come to troops in service. But for a case or two of valoroid in the regiment, we should have taken part in the Battle of Ulustee, and should have had, as was reported, the right of the line. At any rate, we should have shared the hard knocks and the glory, which were distributed pretty freely to the colored troops then and there. The diary will give, better than can any continuous narrative, our ups and downs of expectation in those days. Camp Shaw, Beaufort, S.C., February 7, 1864. Great are the uncertainties of military orders. Since our recall from Jacksonville, we have had no such surprises as came to us on Wednesday night. It was our third day of a new tour of duty at the picket station. We had just got nicely settled, men well tented, with good floors, and in high spirits, officers at outstations all happy, Mrs. coming to stay with her husband, and we at headquarters just in order, house cleaned, moss garlands up, camellias and jessamines in the wash-tin basins, baby in bliss. Our usual run of visitors had just set in. 2 Beaufort captains and a surgeon had just risen from a late dinner, after a flag of truce. General Saxton and his wife had driven away but an hour or two before. We were all sitting about busy, with a great fire blazing. Mrs. D. had just remarked triumphantly, "Last time I had but a mouthful here, and now I shall be here 3 weeks, when—" In dropped, like a bombshell, a dispatch announcing that we were to be relieved by the 8th Maine the next morning, as General Gillmore had sent an order that we should be ready for departure from Beaufort at any moment. Conjectures, orders, packing, sending couriers to outstations were the employments of the evening. The men received the news with cheers, and we all came in next morning. February 11, 1864. For 3 days we have watched the river, and every little steamboat that comes up for coal brings out spy-glasses and conjectures, and "Dar's de 4th New Hampshire," for when that comes, it is said, we go. Meanwhile we hear stirring news from Florida, and the men are very impatient to be off. It is remarkable how much more thoroughly they look at the things as soldiers than last year, and how much less us homebound men, the South Carolinians, I mean, for of course the Floridians would naturally wish to go to Florida. But in every way I see the gradual change in them, sometimes with a sigh, as parents watch their children growing up, and miss the droll speeches from the confiding ignorance of childhood. Sometimes it comes over me with a pang that they are growing more like white men, less naive and less grotesque. Still, I think there is enough of it to last, and that their joyous buoyancy, at least, will hold out while life does. As for our destination, our greatest fear is of finding ourselves posted at Hilton Head and going no farther. As a dashing Irish officer remarked the other day, if we are ordered away anywhere, I hope it will be either to go to Florida or else stay here. Sublime uncertainties again. After being ordered in from picket under marching orders, after the subsequent 10 days of uncertainty, after watching every steamboat that came up the river to see if the 4th New Hampshire was on board, at last the regiment came. Then followed another break. There was no transportation to take us. At last a boat was notified. Then General Saxton, as anxious to keep us as was the regiment to go, played his last card in a smallpox, telegraphing to department headquarters that we had it dangerously in the regiment. Notebook. All varioloid, light at that, and besides, we always have it. Then the order came to leave behind the sick and those who had been peculiarly exposed, and embark the rest the next day. Great was the jubilee. The men were up, I verily believe, by 3 in the morning, and by 8 the whole camp was demolished or put in wagons, and we were on our way. The soldiers of the 4th New Hampshire swarmed in. Every board was swept away by them. There had been a time when colored boards, if I may delicately so express myself, were repudiated by white soldiers, but that epoch had long since passed. I gave my new tent frame, even the latch, to Colonel Bell, ditto Lieutenant Colonel, and to Lieutenant Colonel. Down we marched, the men singing John Brown, and marching along, and gwine in de wilderness. Women in tears and smiles lined the way. We halted opposite the dear General's. We cheered, he speeched, I speeched, we all embraced symbolically, and cheered some more. Then we went to work at the wharf. Vast wagon loads of tents, rations, ordnance, and what not, disappeared in the capacious maw of the Delaware. In the midst of it all came riding down General Saxton with a despatch from Hilton Head. "If you think the amount of smallpox in the 1st South Carolina Volunteers sufficient, the order will be countermanded." "What shall I say?" quoth the guilty general, perceiving how preposterously too late the negotiation was reopened. "Say, sir," quoth I, "say that we are on board already, and the smallpox left behind. Say we had only 13 cases, chiefly varioloid, and 10 almost well." Our blood was up with the tremendous morning's work done, and rather than turn back, we felt ready to hold down Major General Gilmore, commanding department, and all his staff upon the wharf, and vaccinate them by main force. So General Saxton rode away, and we worked away. Just as the last wagon load but one was being transferred to the omnivorous depths of the Delaware, which I should think would have been filled 10 times over with what we had put into it, down rode the General, with a fiendish joy in his bright eyes, and held out a paper, one of the familiar rescripts from headquarters. "The marching orders of the 1st South Carolina Volunteers are hereby countermanded." "Major Trowbridge," said I, "will you give my compliments to Lieutenant Hooper, somewhere in the hold of that steamer, and direct him to set his men at work to bring out every individual article which they have carried in?" And I sat down on a pile of boards. "You will return to your old camping ground, Colonel," said the General placidly. "Now," he added, with some serene satisfaction, "we will have some brigade drills." Brigade drills! Since Mr. Pickwick, with his heartless tomato sauce and warming pans, there had been nothing so aggravating as to try to solace us, who were as good as on board the ship and under way. Nay, in imagination, as far up as St. John's, as Pilatka at least, with brigade drills. It was very kind and flattering in him to wish to keep us, but unhappily we had made up our minds to go. Never did officer ride at the head of a battalion of more woebegone, spiritless wretches than I led back from Beaufort that day. "When I marched down to de Landing," said one of the men afterwards, "my knapsack full of feathers. Coming back, he led, and the lead, instead of the feathers, rested on the heart of every one." As if the disappointment itself were not sufficient, we had to return to our pretty camp, accustomed to its drawing-room order, to find it a desert. Every board gone from the floors, the screens torn down from the poles, all the little conveniences scattered, and, to crown it all, a cold breeze, such as we had not known since New Year's Day, blowing across the camp and flooding everything with dust. I sincerely hoped the regiment would never behave after a defeat as they behaved then. Every man seemed crushed, officers and soldiers alike. When they broke ranks, they went and lay down like sheep where their tents used to be, or wandered disconsolately about, looking for their stray belongings. The scene was so infinitely dolorous that it gradually put me in the highest spirits. The ludicrousness of the whole affair was so complete, there was nothing to do but laugh. The horrible dust blew till every officer had some black spot on his nose, which paralyzed pathos. Of course, the only way was to set them all to work as soon as possible, and work them we did, I at the camp and the Major at the wharf, loading and unloading wagons, and just reversing all which the morning had done. The New Hampshire men were very considerate, and gave back most of what they had taken, though many of our men were really too delicate or proud to ask, or even take, what they had once given to the soldiers or to the colored people. I had no such delicacy about my tent frame, and by night things had resumed something of their old aspect, and cheerfulness was restored in part. Yet long after this I found one first sergeant absolutely in tears, a Florida man, most of